At 24, Stacy Jaxx thought she had her life figured out. A promising career as a graphic designer in Portland, Oregon, a loving fiancé named Marcus Chen, and most importantly, a wedding fund she'd been carefully building for 3 years. Every dollar saved was a step closer to her dream wedding, the kind of celebration that would mark the beginning of her happily ever after. But sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who can hurt us deepest. And sometimes the very foundation we've built our dreams upon can crumble in a single phone call. This is the story of how one family's betrayal changed everything, and how sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the catalyst for discovering who we really are.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Stacy Jaxx had always been the responsible one in the Henderson family. While her older brother Tyler spent his 20s traveling across Europe with whatever money he could scrape together, and her younger sister Melissa bounced between part-time jobs and community college courses, Stacy had been steadily building her future since she graduated from Oregon State University. Her small apartment in the Pearl District wasn't much to look at. A cramped studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet, but it was hers. Every morning, she'd wake up at 6 a.m., make her coffee in the same chipped mug she'd had since college, and walk the 12 blocks to Morrison Creative Agency, where she'd spent the last 2 years climbing from junior designer to lead graphic designer. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days involved designing brochures for dental offices, creating logos for small businesses, and occasionally working on a campaign that actually excited her. But Stacy loved the puzzle of visual communication. How the right combination of colors, fonts, and imagery could tell a story or evoke an emotion. More importantly, the job paid well enough to live on and still save money. That savings account was Stacy's pride and joy. She'd opened it 3 months after Marcus proposed to her during a camping trip to Crater Lake. The proposal itself had been perfect in its simplicity. No flash mob, no jumbotron, just Marcus on one knee beside the crystal-clear water, telling her she was his forever person. The ring was modest, a simple solitaire they'd picked out together, but Stacy had never loved anything more. From that moment, every financial decision Stacy made was filtered through one question. Will this help or hurt the wedding fund? She packed lunches instead of buying them, chose Netflix over going to movies, and turned down weekend trips with friends. While her co-workers grabbed $15 salads from the trendy spot downstairs, Stacy ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at her desk. Her parents, Robert and Linda Henderson, had raised their 3 children in a modest ranch house in Beaverton, about 30 minutes outside Portland. Robert worked as a maintenance supervisor at a paper mill, and Linda had spent 20 years as a secretary at the local elementary school before retiring early due to back problems. They weren't wealthy, but they'd always managed to provide for their family, though luxury was never really an option. When Stacy told them about her engagement, her mother had cried happy tears and immediately started talking about flowers and dresses. But when the conversation turned to finances, the reality hit hard. Robert and Linda had always assumed they'd help pay for their children's weddings, but with Linda's medical bills and Robert's reduced hours at the mill, they simply couldn't contribute much. "Honey, we wish we could give you the wedding of your dreams," Linda had said, holding Stacy's hands across the kitchen table. "But right now, we're just not in a position to help much financially." Stacy had hugged her mother tightly. "It's okay, Mom. I understand. Marcus and I will figure it out." And they had figured it out, or at least Stacy had. Marcus, who worked as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown, was practical about money, but not nearly as focused on saving as Stacy was. He contributed what he could to our shared wedding fund, but the bulk of the savings came from Stacy's disciplined approach. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. She had calculated that they needed $25,000 for the wedding they wanted, nothing extravagant, but enough for a nice venue, good food, a photographer, and a dress that would make her feel beautiful. Her current savings rate of $800 a month, plus Marcus's contributions of about $300, they'd have enough money in 18 months. Every payday, Stacy would transfer her predetermined amount into the joint savings account she'd opened specifically for the wedding. She'd named it Stacy and Marcus Forever Fund in the bank's online system, and checking the growing balance had become a weekly ritual that never failed to make her smile. The account was set up with both her name and her mother's name on it, a decision she'd made for practical reasons. Linda had suggested it after hearing stories about couples who broke up and couldn't access their wedding funds. This way, if anything happens, someone responsible can make sure the money is used for what it's intended for, Linda had reasoned. It seemed sensible at the time, and Stacy trusted her mother completely. By the spring of 2024, the balance had grown to $18,500. Stacy would log into her banking app during lunch breaks, watching the numbers climb steadily upward. She'd started a wedding planning binder filled with printouts from Pinterest and magazine clippings. She and Marcus had visited 3 potential venues, and they were close to putting down a deposit on the Oaks Pioneer Church, a beautiful historic venue with large windows and original hardwood floors. The wedding was planned for October 12, 2024, which was exactly 2 years after their first official date. The seasonal timing would keep costs down while still providing the warm, golden light that Stacy envisioned for their photos. She had already contacted a photographer whose work she admired, and they'd discussed package options that would fit within her budget.
Marcus had initially been overwhelmed by Stacy's detailed planning, but he'd grown to appreciate her organized approach. "You're like a wedding planning machine," he'd tease her, but always with admiration in his voice. He knew how hard she worked and how much this meant to her. Stacy's co-workers at Morrison Creative had become invested in the wedding planning too. She'd show them venue photos during coffee breaks, and they'd offer opinions on color schemes and decoration ideas. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, had even offered to design their wedding invitations as a congratulations gift. Life felt structured and purposeful. Every sacrifice Stacy made was building towards something beautiful and meaningful. When she declined invitations to expensive brunches or weekend getaways, she'd remind herself that she was investing in her future. The wedding wasn't just a party, it was the foundation of the life she and Marcus were building together. The Henderson family had always been close, despite their different approaches to life. Sunday dinners at the family home were a regular tradition, and Stacy genuinely enjoyed spending time with her parents and siblings. Tyler, now 27, had recently returned from his latest adventure, 6 months teaching English in Vietnam, and was stayed in his old bedroom while he figured out his next move. Melissa, 21, was still finding herself, switching between wanting to be a veterinarian, a social worker, and most recently, a travel blogger, like some influencer she followed on Instagram. During these family gatherings, Stacy would update everyone on the wedding plans. Linda would get excited about potential dress shopping trips, Robert would nod approvingly at their practical approach to budgeting, and Tyler and Melissa would offer suggestions that ranged from helpful to completely unrealistic. "You should have the wedding in Thailand," Tyler had suggested on Sunday in March. "It would cost half as much, and everyone would get a vacation out of it." "Not everyone can afford to fly to Thailand, Tyler," Stacy had replied patiently. "We want our friends and family to actually be able to attend." These conversations always reinforced Stacy's confidence in her approach. She was being responsible and realistic, planning a wedding that would be beautiful without being financially reckless. She was proud of the discipline it took to save so consistently, and she looked forward to the day when all her careful planning would pay off in the perfect celebration of her and Marcus's love. The wedding fund had become more than just money in an account. It represented Stacy's commitment to building a solid foundation for her marriage, her ability to set goals and achieve them, and her belief that good things come to those who work hard and plan carefully. As spring turned to summer, with the wedding just 4 months away, Stacy felt like everything was falling into place. The venue deposit would be due in August, followed by payments to the photographer, caterer, and florist. She had spreadsheets tracking every expense and timeline, and she felt completely prepared for the final stretch of wedding planning. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything she'd worked for would disappear in a single, devastating moment, and that the people she trusted most would be the ones to take it all away.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The call came on a Tuesday morning in July, right as Stacy was putting the finishing touches on a logo design for a new coffee roastery. Her phone buzzed against her desk, and she glanced down to see her mother's name on the screen. Linda rarely called during work hours, so Stacy immediately felt a small flutter of concern. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" Stacy answered, saving her work and swiveling away from her computer. "Oh, honey, everything's wonderful!" Linda's voice was bright, almost giddy with excitement. "I have the most amazing news. You're never going to believe what happened." Stacy relaxed at her mother's cheerful tone. "What's going on?" "Well, you know how your father's been so stressed about work lately, and my back has been acting up again. We've both been feeling so run down. And then yesterday, something incredible happened." Linda paused dramatically, and Stacy could practically hear her mother bouncing with anticipation. "Your Uncle Jerry called. You remember Uncle Jerry from Phoenix? And he told us about this incredible deal he found. There's this travel company that had a last-minute cancellation, and they're offering a 2-week Mediterranean cruise for 4 people at an absolutely unbeatable price. We're talking about visiting Italy, Greece, Spain, all those places we've dreamed about but never thought we could afford." Stacy felt her stomach begin to tighten, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. "That sounds nice, Mom, but you know money's been tight for you guys." "That's the beautiful part, sweetheart. The deal is only available if we book today, literally today. And Uncle Jerry said he'd cover half the cost if we can come up with the other half. It works out to just about $18,000 for all 4 of us. Can you imagine? Your father and I haven't had a real vacation in 15 years, and Tyler's been working so hard since he got back from Vietnam, and Melissa just finished her spring semester with straight A's for the first time ever." The number hit Stacy like a physical blow. $18,000. Almost exactly what was currently sitting in her wedding fund. "Mom, that's a lot of money. Where would you get $18,000? There was a brief pause, and when Linda spoke again, her voice had a defensive edge to it that Stacy had rarely heard before. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, honey. I know this might seem a little unusual, but I remembered that I am on your wedding account, and I checked the balance yesterday. There's $18,500 in there, which is perfect. I could transfer the money for the cruise, and you still have over a year to save up again before the wedding. This opportunity won't come again, Stacy. The travel agent said this kind of deal happens maybe once every 5 years. Stacy's mouth went completely dry. The office around her seemed to fade away, and all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. "Mom, you can't be serious. That's my wedding money. Marcus and I have been saving for 3 years. "Oh, sweetheart, I know it seems scary, but think about it practically. You're only 24 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you to have weddings and celebrations. But your father is 59 years old, and who knows when we'll get another chance like this? We might not be healthy enough to travel in a few years." Linda's voice was gaining momentum, the way it did when she was trying to convince herself of something, as much as she was trying to convince someone else. "Besides, you're not getting married until next October. That gives you 15 months to save the money back up. If you just increase your savings a little bit, maybe put aside $1,000 a month instead of $800, you'll have even more than you do now." "Mom, I can't save $1,000 a month. I can barely save $800 as it is." Stacy's voice was rising, and she realized her coworkers were starting to glance in her direction. She grabbed her phone and walked quickly toward the conference room, shutting the door behind her. "Mom, this isn't just about the money, Mom. This is about the fact that you're talking about taking my wedding fund without even asking me first. You checked my account balance without telling me. You made plans for my money without including me in the conversation." "Now, Stacy, don't be dramatic. I'm not stealing anything. My name is on that account fair and square. We put it there specifically so someone responsible could manage the money if needed. And right now, I'm managing it in a way that benefits the whole family."
The words hit Stacy like a slap. The rational part of her brain understood that technically, legally, her mother probably could access the account. But the emotional reality felt like a complete violation of trust.
Benefits the whole family? Mom, I'm part of this family too, and this doesn't benefit me at all. It ruins everything Marcus and I have been working toward. You're being selfish, Stacy. Linda's voice was cooling, taking on the tone she'd used when disciplining her children years ago. This isn't just about you. Tyler has been struggling since he got back from overseas, and this trip would be so good for him. And Melissa is finally doing well in school. She deserves a reward. Your father has given 30 years of his life to that paper mill, and he's never asked for anything for himself. What about what I've given? Stacy's voice cracked. What about the 3 years I've spent eating peanut butter sandwiches and walking to work in the rain to save every penny? What about all the things Marcus and I have given up so we could have this one special day? You can have your special day later, honey. Weddings happen all the time, but opportunities like this, they're once in a lifetime. Stacy sank into one of the conference room chairs, feeling like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Everything her mother was saying sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath, it felt fundamentally wrong. Mom, please don't do this. That money represents 3 years of my life. Every dollar in that account is a sacrifice Marcus and I made together. It's not just money, it's our dreams. Dreams can wait, Stacy. Family can't. Uncle Jerry needs an answer in 2 hours or the deal goes to someone else. I've already talked to Tyler and Melissa, and they're both so excited. Your father actually smiled for the first time in months when I told him about Italy. The manipulation was subtle, but unmistakable. Linda was painting Stacy as the villain who would deny her family this wonderful opportunity, the selfish daughter who cared more about a party than her parents' happiness. What if I say no? I asked quietly. Say no to what, honey? I'm not asking for permission. I'm calling to let you know what's happening because I love you and I want you to understand why I'm making this decision. The transfer will be taking place this afternoon so we can book the cruise tonight. The finality in Linda's voice was devastating. This wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. It was a notification. Mom, if you do this, you're stealing from me. I don't care whose name is on the account. That money belongs to me and Marcus. Don't you dare use that word. I have never stolen anything in my life, and I won't have my own daughter accusing me of theft. I'm making a family decision that benefits everyone in the long run. You'll thank me for this someday. No, I won't. I will never thank you for this. There was a long silence on the line. When Linda spoke again, her voice was cold and formal. I'm sorry you feel that way, Stacy. I really am. But sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions that their children don't understand right away. The transfer will happen this afternoon. I suggest you start making new savings plans. The line went dead. Stacy sat in the empty conference room, staring at her phone. Outside the glass walls, she could see her coworkers going about their normal Tuesday morning routines, completely unaware that her entire world had just collapsed. She opened her banking app with trembling fingers and logged into the wedding account. The balance still showed $18,500, but she knew it was only a matter of hours before those numbers would change to zero. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How's your day going, beautiful? Still on track for lunch at noon? Stacy stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell the person you love that your family just stole your future together? How do you explain that the wedding you've been planning for months might not happen because your own mother decided a cruise was more important than your happiness? She typed and deleted a dozen different responses, but finally settled on, something came up. Can we talk tonight instead? As she walked back to her desk on unsteady legs, Stacy realized this wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about discovering that the people she trusted most in the world were capable of betraying her in ways she never could have imagined. And it was about learning that sometimes
the family you love can hurt you more deeply than any stranger ever could.
The notification came at 3:47 p.m., just as Stacy was pretending to work on a brochure design for a local veterinary clinic. Her phone buzzed with a banking alert. Account transfer, $18,000 withdrawn from Stacy and Marcus Forever Fund. She stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. In that moment, 3 years of careful planning, sacrifice, and dreams disappeared into her family's vacation fund. The account balance now read $500, barely enough to cover the bank's minimum balance requirement. Stacy walked to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, where she finally allowed herself to cry. Not the gentle tears of disappointment, but the harsh, body-shaking sobs of someone whose trust had been completely shattered. She cried for the wedding that might never happen, for the naive belief that her family would protect her dreams, and for the realization that she was truly on her own. When she returned to her desk 20 minutes later, Janet Morrison was waiting with a concerned expression. "Stacy, honey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Stacy lied, settling into her chair and avoiding eye contact. "Just dealing with some family stuff." "Family stuff has a way of being the hardest stuff," Janet said gently. "Take tomorrow off if you need it. The Peterson account can wait." That evening, Stacy sat across from Marcus at their favorite coffee shop, trying to find the words to explain what had happened. Marcus had been excited when he arrived, eager to share news about a potential promotion at his accounting firm. His enthusiasm died the moment he saw her face. "My family took our wedding money," she said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus blinked several times, as if trying to process what she'd said. "What do you mean, took it?" Stacy explained the phone call, the cruise, the transfer of funds. With each detail, she watched Marcus's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to anger. "They can't do that," he said finally. "That's theft. We'll call the bank. We'll call the police if we have to." "My mother's name is on the account," Stacy said quietly. Technically, she had every legal right to take the money. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Stacy recognized as his way of processing stress. "Okay, so what do we do? Do we postpone the wedding? Can we get a loan?" "I don't know," Stacy admitted. "I've been thinking about it all day and I just don't know." They sat in silence for several minutes, both staring at their untouched coffee cups. Finally, Marcus reached across the table and took her hands. "Whatever we decide, we'll figure it out together. This doesn't change how I feel about you or about us." His words were meant to comfort, but they only highlighted the uncertainty that now surrounded our future. Everything they'd planned was built on that wedding fund, and without it, their carefully constructed timeline had crumbled. Over the following days, Stacy found herself in a strange emotional space. The initial shock had worn off, replaced with something deeper and more complex. She wasn't just angry about the money, she was questioning everything she thought she knew about her family, her place in their hierarchy, and what she was willing to accept. Her siblings had been texting her enthusiastically about the cruise preparations. Tyler sent photos of swimwear he was considering, while Melissa shared screenshots of Mediterranean restaurants she wanted to try. Neither of them mentioned the source of their vacation funding, as if the money had simply materialized from thin air. Robert had called once, his voice awkward and apologetic. "Stacy, I want you to know this wasn't my idea. Your mother handled all the arrangements. But I have to admit, I'm looking forward to seeing Italy before I'm too old to walk around those cobblestone streets." Even her father's guilt felt like manipulation, acknowledging wrongdoing while simultaneously justifying it. It was during a particularly difficult Thursday evening that the vision began to emerge. Stacy was sitting in her small apartment, surrounded by wedding planning materials that now felt like artifacts from a previous life. She picked up the folder containing vendor quotes and contracts, initially intending to throw it all away. But as she flipped through the pages, something shifted in her perspective. She began to see the situation differently. Her family had shown her exactly where she stood in their priorities, but they had also inadvertently given her something valuable: clarity. For 3 years, she had been living according to other people's expectations, saving for a wedding because that's what engaged people do,
maintaining family relationships because that's what good daughters do, accepting limitations because that's what responsible adults do. But what if she didn't have to accept any of it? Stacy opened her laptop and began researching. She looked up average wedding costs in different cities, explored alternative venues and celebration styles, and investigated financing options. More importantly, she started questioning why she wanted the wedding she'd been planning. How much of it was actually her dream, and how much was simply what she thought a wedding should be? The more she researched, the more excited she became. There were couples who got married in national parks for the cost of a permit, others who had intimate celebrations in their own backyards, some who eloped to exotic locations and used their wedding budget for the honeymoon of a lifetime.
By Friday evening, Stacy had filled a new notebook with ideas, costs, and possibilities. When Marcus arrived for their weekly date night, she was practically vibrating with energy. "I've been thinking," she said, barely letting him get through the door before launching into her discoveries. "What if losing that money wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to us? What if it was the best?" Marcus looked skeptical. "I'm going to need you to walk me through that logic." Stacy spread her research across her small dining table. "Look at this. We were going to spend $25,000 on one day. One day, Marcus. For that same amount of money, we could get married in Costa Rica and stay for 2 weeks. Or we could have a small ceremony here and use the money as a down payment on a house. Or we could invest it and start building real wealth instead of throwing it all at a party." She could see Marcus beginning to catch her enthusiasm. "But what about your family? What about all the people we've already talked to about October? What about them?" Stacy's voice was stronger than she'd heard it in days. "My family made it clear that their wants matter more than my dreams. Our friends and extended family will understand if we change our plans. And honestly, how many of those people were we inviting because we wanted them there versus because we felt obligated?" Marcus sat down heavily in one of her mismatched chairs. "You're talking about changing everything." "I'm talking about making it ours," Stacy said, sitting across from him. "The wedding we were planning was beautiful, but it was also what everyone expected. It was safe. It was conventional. It was ordinary." She pulled out her laptop and showed him a website for elopement packages in Iceland. "Look at this! We could get married under the Northern Lights. Or here, a ceremony on a beach in Thailand, where the total cost would be less than just our catering budget was going to be." Marcus scrolled through the photos, and Stacy could see the possibilities beginning to capture his imagination. "This is crazy," he said, but he was smiling. "Maybe crazy is what we need," Stacy replied. "Maybe losing that money was the universe's way of telling us to think bigger." That weekend, they spent hours researching unconventional wedding options. They discovered couples who had gotten married while skydiving, others who had ceremonies underwater while scuba diving, and still others who had exchanged vows while climbing mountains in Nepal. "We could literally get married anywhere in the world," Marcus said, looking up from an article about weddings in Japanese cherry blossom gardens. "We're not tied to October anymore. We're not tied to Portland. We're not tied to anything." The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The theft of their wedding fund had initially felt like the end of their dreams, but it was actually the beginning of something much larger. They were no longer planning a wedding, they were designing an adventure. By Sunday evening, they had narrowed their options down to 3 possibilities: an elopement in New Zealand's South Island, a small ceremony in a medieval castle in Scotland, or a beach wedding in the Maldives followed by a 2-week honeymoon exploring Southeast Asia. "Any of these would cost less than our original wedding," Stacy said, looking at their calculations. "And they would be completely ours. No family drama, no obligation invitations, no stress about seating charts or catering preferences." Marcus leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Your family thought they were ruining our wedding plans. Instead, they might have given us the push we needed to have the wedding of our actual dreams instead of the wedding we thought we were supposed to want."
Exactly, Stacy said. They showed me that I can't count on them to protect what matters to me. So I need to learn to protect it myself. And the first thing I'm going to protect is our right to make our own choices about our own lives. That night, as Marcus slept beside her, Stacy stared at the ceiling and felt something she hadn't experienced in days. Hope. Not the cautious, qualified hope of someone trying to salvage a bad situation, but the bold, unrestricted hope of someone who had just realized that the world was much bigger than she had previously imagined. Her family had taken her money, but they had inadvertently given her something more valuable: permission to stop living according to other people's expectations and start building the life she actually wanted. The vision was finally clear, and it was more beautiful than anything she had previously dared to imagine.
Monday morning arrived with a sense of purpose Stacy hadn't felt in weeks. She woke up before her alarm, made coffee with the French press Marcus had given her for Christmas, and opened her laptop at the kitchen table. Today wasn't about mourning what she'd lost, it was about building what she was going to gain. The first step was practical, canceling everything they'd already booked for the October wedding. Stacy pulled up her carefully organized spreadsheet and began making phone calls. The venue coordinator at Oaks Pioneer Church was understanding, especially when Stacy explained they were moving the ceremony out of state. Because they hadn't put down the full deposit yet, they only lost the $500 booking fee. The photographer was trickier. Sarah Chin had already blocked out their date and turned down other clients. But when Stacy offered to write her a glowing review and refer other couples, Sarah agreed to waive the cancellation fee in exchange for keeping half the deposit as a rebooking credit for whenever Stacy decided to hire her services again. Each phone call felt like cutting ties with an old version of herself. The florist, the caterer, the string quartet. All these vendors had been part of a vision that no longer fit her life. Some were disappointed, others were gracious, but all of them represented a future Stacy was consciously choosing to abandon. By noon, she had freed up $3,200 in deposits and down payments. Combined with the $500 remaining in their account, they had $3,700 to work with. Not much for a traditional wedding, but potentially enough for the right adventure. That evening, Stacy and Marcus met at Powell's Books, their usual spot for important conversations. They found a quiet corner in the travel section, surrounded by guidebooks for destinations they'd only dreamed of visiting. "I've been thinking about New Zealand," Marcus said, pulling out his phone to show her photos he'd bookmarked. "Look at this place called Queenstown. We could get married overlooking Lake Wakatipu with the mountains in the background. The whole package, including flights, accommodation, and ceremony, would be about $8,000. Stacy studied the photos. The landscape was breathtaking, dramatic peaks reflected in pristine water, exactly the kind of natural cathedral that would make their vows feel sacred and meaningful. "How do we come up with the other $4,300? She asked. "I've been thinking about that too. I could pick up freelance bookkeeping work on weekends. You could take on some side design projects. If we both hustle for the next 6 months, we could save enough to make this happen." The plan was ambitious, but achievable. More importantly, it felt like theirs, in a way the original wedding never had. Every dollar they earned would be a conscious choice, a step towards something they both genuinely wanted. Over the next few days, Stacy threw herself into research with the same intensity she'd once devoted to saving money. She joined online forums for couples who had eloped internationally, reading about visa requirements, marriage licenses, and the logistics of planning a wedding from thousands of miles away. She discovered that New Zealand had a simple marriage process for international couples, requiring only a 3-day waiting period and basic documentation. The country's tourism industry had built an entire infrastructure around destination weddings, with coordinators who specialized in helping foreign couples navigate the legal requirements. More importantly, she found dozens of testimonials from couples who had chosen similar paths. Their stories were filled with adventure, intimacy, and the joy of starting their married life with a shared experience that was completely their own. "Listen to this," Stacy said to Marcus over dinner Wednesday night, reading from her laptop. "This couple from Michigan got married in Milford Sound and said it was the most spiritual experience of their lives. They spent their honeymoon hiking the Milford Track and said they felt like they'd started their marriage with a pilgrimage." Marcus set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "That sounds incredible.
But are you sure this is what you want? Not just what you want instead of what your family took, but what you actually genuinely want? It was a fair question, and one Stacy had been asking herself. Was she running toward New Zealand or just away from Portland? Was this an authentic dream or a reaction to betrayal? I keep thinking about her engagement, she said slowly. Remember how perfect it felt at Crater Lake? Just you, me, and all that natural beauty? No audience, no performance, just us making a promise to each other in the most beautiful place we'd ever seen. Marcus nodded, smiling at the memory. That's what I want our wedding to be like. I want it to feel like that moment. Intimate, genuine, and surrounded by something bigger than ourselves. The more I think about walking down an aisle while 150 people watch me, the more it feels like a performance instead of a sacred moment.
That weekend, they took a concrete step forward. Stacy used her lunch break Friday to visit a travel agent downtown, a woman named Rebecca, who specialized in adventure travel and destination weddings. Rebecca's office was covered with photos from clients' trips, couples getting married on African safaris, exchanging vows in front of glaciers in Alaska, celebrating on beaches in Fiji. New Zealand is one of my favorite destinations for couples, Rebecca told them, pulling out a thick folder of information. The country is incredibly welcoming to international visitors, the scenery is unparalleled, and the adventure opportunities are endless. Plus, March is their autumn season, so you'd have beautiful weather and fewer crowds. She showed them detailed itineraries, cost breakdowns, and testimonials from other couples. More importantly, she made the logistics seem manageable rather than overwhelming. The total cost for what you're describing, flights, accommodation for a week, the wedding ceremony, and basic photography, would be about $7,800 for both of you, Rebecca explained. That includes everything except meals and activities beyond the wedding day. Stacy felt her heart racing. It was more than their current savings, but achievable if they both committed to earning extra income over the next 6 months. Can we think about it over the weekend? Marcus asked. Of course, Rebecca said. But I should mention that if you're serious about a March wedding, you'll want to book by the end of August. International travel and wedding coordination take time to arrange properly. Walking back to their cars after the appointment, Stacy felt a mixture of excitement and terror. They were talking about spending more money than either of them had ever spent on anything except college tuition. They were planning to get married in a country neither of them had ever visited, surrounded by strangers instead of family. Are we completely insane? She asked Marcus. Maybe. But maybe insane is exactly what we need to be. That Sunday, they made their decision over brunch at their favorite cafe. Stacy had spent the weekend calculating and recalculating their finances, figuring out exactly how much extra income they'd need to generate over the next 6 months. Marcus had started researching New Zealand's South Island, reading travel blogs and watching YouTube videos until he felt like he could navigate Queenstown in his sleep. I want to do this, Stacy said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. Not because my family ruined our original plans, but because this feels more like us than anything we were planning before. I want to do it too. I want our wedding day to be an adventure we share, not a party we host. They shook hands across the table, laughing at the formality of the gesture. Then Stacy pulled out her phone and called Rebecca. We'd like to book the New Zealand package for March 15th, if that date is available. Excellent choice, Rebecca said. I'll get the paperwork started on Monday. You two are going to have the wedding of a lifetime. That afternoon, Stacy began the practical work of earning extra income. She updated her freelance portfolio website, reached out to former clients about additional projects, and posted her services on local freelancer boards. Marcus started contacting small businesses about weekend bookkeeping work. He found a restaurant owner who needed help organizing his books every Saturday morning for $50 per session. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. More importantly, every dollar they earned felt like an investment in their shared dream, rather than an obligation to meet others' expectations. The transformation was remarkable. 2 weeks earlier, Stacy had felt like a victim of her family's betrayal. Now she felt like the architect of her own future. She was working harder than ever, but the work had purpose and direction that energized her rather than exhausted her.
For the first time in her life, she was building something that was completely hers, funded by her own efforts and guided by her own vision. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely perfect.
August arrived with a brutal heat wave that seemed to mirror the pressure building in Stacy's life. What had felt like an exciting challenge in July was becoming a grueling test of endurance. The side projects that had initially energized her were now consuming every spare moment, and the financial reality of funding a New Zealand wedding was proving more demanding than she had anticipated. Stacy's daily routine had become relentless. She'd wake at 5:30 a.m. to work on freelance projects before her regular job, spend her lunch breaks on client calls, and stay up until midnight refining logos and layouts. Her small apartment had transformed into a 24/7 design studio, with projects spread across every surface and her laptop permanently plugged in to avoid battery drain. The quality of her work at Morrison Creative was beginning to suffer. Janet had pulled her aside twice to ask if everything was okay, noting that Stacy seemed distracted and was missing small details she would normally catch. The irony wasn't lost on Stacy. In trying to fund her dream wedding, she was risking the job that made her regular life possible. Marcus was facing his own challenges. The weekend bookkeeping work had expanded to 3 different clients, but the restaurant owner who had been his biggest source of extra income suddenly couldn't pay his bills. Marco's Bistro was struggling with post-pandemic debt, and the owner, Tony Marco, had to let Marcus go with only a week's notice. "I'm sorry, kid," Tony had said, genuine regret in his voice. "I wish I could keep paying you, but I might not be able to keep the doors open much longer." The loss of that income meant Marcus needed to find new clients quickly, but the small business market was competitive, and many owners were trying to handle their books themselves to save money. Their savings progress had slowed dramatically. Instead of the steady $1,000 per month they had projected, they were averaging closer to $600. At that rate, they wouldn't have enough money for the New Zealand wedding until May, 2 months after their planned March date. The stress was affecting their relationship in ways Stacy hadn't expected. Marcus had always been naturally optimistic, but she could see doubt creeping into his expressions when he thought she wasn't looking. Their conversations had become dominated by logistics and finances, leaving little room for the romance and excitement that had initially driven their decision. "Maybe we should consider postponing until next year," Marcus suggested one evening as they sat at Stacy's kitchen table, surrounded by receipts and invoices. "Give ourselves more time to save properly." The suggestion hit Stacy like a physical blow. Postponing felt like giving up, like admitting that her family's betrayal had won after all. "We can't postpone," she said firmly. "We already changed everything once. If we postpone now, we'll keep finding reasons to postpone, and we'll never actually do it." "But Stacy, we're burning ourselves out. Look at us. When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about money or work? When's the last time we just enjoyed being together?" He was right, and they both knew it. The pressure of earning extra income while maintaining their regular jobs was taking a toll that went beyond simple fatigue. Stacy had developed a persistent headache from staring at computer screens for 14 hours a day, and Marcus had gained weight from eating fast food during his marathon weekend work sessions. The situation became more complicated when Linda called in mid-August, her voice bright with excitement about the upcoming Mediterranean cruise. "We leave next week, and I wanted to thank you again for making this possible," Linda said, apparently oblivious to the impact of her words. "Tyler found this amazing excursion in Santorini, and Melissa has been practicing her Italian phrases. Your father even bought a new camera to document everything." Stacy gripped her phone tightly, fighting the urge to hang up. "Mom, you didn't make this possible by asking me. You made it possible by taking money that wasn't yours." "Oh, honey, don't still be upset about that. You'll have plenty of time to save for another wedding. But this cruise is happening now, and we're going to make memories that will last forever." "What about my memories, Mom?
what about the wedding Marcus and I have been planning? Well, from what I hear through Tyler, you two changed all your plans anyway. So really, the money situation worked out fine for everyone. Stacy realized with a chill that Tyler had been sharing details about their New Zealand plans with the family. She'd mentioned their new direction to him during a brief phone conversation, not realizing that he would treat it as family gossip. "How do you know about our new plans?" she asked. "Tyler told us all about your in-venture wedding idea. It sounds very unconventional. Are you sure that's really what you want? Getting married in a foreign country with no family around?" The disapproval in Linda's voice was unmistakable. Even while spending Stacy's money on their own vacation, the family was judging her choices and finding them to be lacking. "Yes, Mom, it's exactly what I want. It's what Marcus and I both want."
Well, I suppose everyone has different ideas about what makes a proper wedding. I just hope you don't regret missing out on having your family there to celebrate with you. After Linda hung up, Stacy sat in her car in the Morrison Creative parking lot, crying tears of frustration and anger. Her family was about to enjoy a luxurious vacation funded by her stolen dreams, while she and Marcus were working themselves to exhaustion trying to rebuild what had been taken from them. The challenges intensified in September. One of Stacy's biggest freelance clients, a startup that had promised 3 months of steady work, suddenly ran out of funding and couldn't pay their outstanding invoices. She was owed $2,400 that she desperately needed for the New Zealand fund, but the company's founder was apologetic but broke. "I'm so sorry, Stacy. We thought we had another round of investment coming in, but it fell through. I can try to pay you in installments starting next month, but I honestly don't know when we'll have the cash." Around the same time, Marcus discovered that one of his new bookkeeping clients had been lying about his business's financial situation. The client owed thousands in unpaid taxes and was essentially using Marcus to help him juggle creditors. When Marcus realized what was happening and tried to withdraw from the arrangement, the client became hostile and accused him of abandoning a business in crisis. "You can't just walk away when things get complicated," the client had shouted during their final meeting. "I trusted you with sensitive information, and now you're bailing on me." Marcus came home shaken by the confrontation, questioning his judgment and worried about potential legal complications. The stress was manifesting in physical symptoms for both of them. Stacy's persistent headaches had worsened into occasional migraines that forced her to work in a darkened room. Marcus had developed insomnia, lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating their finances, trying to find a path forward that didn't exist. Their relationship was struggling under the constant pressure. Simple conversations became arguments about money. Date nights became strategy sessions. The joy and spontaneity that had always characterized their partnership was buried under spreadsheets and stress. "I feel like we're losing ourselves," Marcus said one Sunday morning, looking exhausted despite sleeping until noon. "We're so focused on this wedding that we're forgetting why we wanted to get married in the first place." Stacy knew he was right, but she couldn't figure out how to step back from the intensity without giving up on their goal entirely. The New Zealand wedding had become more than just a celebration. It was her proof that she could overcome her family's betrayal and build something beautiful despite their actions. Abandoning it felt like admitting defeat. By October, their original wedding date came and went without acknowledgement from either of them. Stacy had wondered if the day would be emotional, but she was too exhausted to feel anything except relief that she wasn't trying to coordinate a local wedding on top of everything else. Their savings account had grown to $5,200, still $2,600 short of their goal, with only 5 months left before their rescheduled March wedding date. The mathematical reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Even if they could maintain their current pace of extra income, they would be cutting it dangerously close. And their current pace was unsustainable. They were both showing signs of burnout that threatened their regular jobs and their health.
Late one evening in mid-October, as Stacy worked on a logo design while Marcus calculated tax estimates at the other end of her kitchen table, she looked up at the man she was supposed to marry in 5 months. He looked older than he had in July, worn down by stress and overwork. She suspected she looked the same. "What if we can't do this?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in both of their minds. Marcus looked up from his calculator, his eyes tired but still kind. "Then we'll figure something else out. But Stacy, I need you to know that this isn't sustainable. We can't keep pushing ourselves like this for 5 more months." As autumn deepened and their challenges multiplied, Stacy began to wonder if pursuing their dream was worth the price they were paying. The question she couldn't answer was whether they were building something beautiful or destroying themselves in the attempt.
November arrived like a cold slap of reality. Stacy's migraines had become so severe that she'd missed 3 days of work in 2 weeks, forcing Janet to assign her projects to other designers. The doctor she'd finally consulted prescribed expensive medication and recommended reducing stress, advice that felt laughably impossible given her circumstances. "You're exhibiting classic symptoms of chronic stress," Dr. Patricia Williams had explained, reviewing Stacy's symptoms with obvious concern. "Your body is telling you to slow down. If you don't listen, these headaches could develop into something more serious." But slowing down felt like surrender. Every hour Stacy wasn't working was money they wouldn't have for New Zealand, time they couldn't afford to waste. She'd started taking the prescription medication to function, but it made her feel disconnected and foggy, affecting the quality of her design work even further. The breaking point came on a gray Thursday morning in mid-November. Stacy was working on a logo for a local yoga studio when her computer crashed, taking 3 hours of unsaved work with it. As she stared at the blank screen, something inside her snapped. She started crying and couldn't stop. Not the controlled tears she'd been allowing herself during bathroom breaks, but deep, body-racking sobs that seemed to come from a place of exhaustion so profound it felt bottomless. Marcus found her 20 minutes later, still crying at her kitchen table, her laptop closed and her project files scattered around her like evidence of a crime. "That's it," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This stops now." "I can't stop," Stacy managed between sobs. "We're so close. We only need $1,500 more dollars." "Look at yourself, Stacy. Really look. When's the last time you smiled? When is the last time we laughed together? You're making yourself sick trying to prove something to people who don't deserve your effort." His words hit her like a physical blow because they were true. She had become someone she didn't recognize, driven, obsessive, and slowly destroying her health and relationships in pursuit of a goal that had become more about revenge than celebration. That same day brought another devastating blow. Rebecca, their travel agent, called with news that would change everything. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this," Rebecca said, her usually cheerful voice strained with regret. "The wedding venue you selected in Queenstown has had to cancel all March bookings. There was structural damage from an earthquake last month, and they won't be operational again until at least June." Stacy felt the room spinning around her. "What about other venues? There have to be alternatives." "There are, but here's the problem. March is peak wedding season in New Zealand, and most quality venues book up a year in advance. I've checked with 5 other locations, and they're all fully booked. The only available options are significantly more expensive or much less desirable." Rebecca offered alternatives: a small city hall ceremony for twice the price, or pushing the wedding back to July when more venues would be available. But July felt impossibly far away, and the city hall option would cost them an additional $3,000 they didn't have. When Stacy hung up the phone, she looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who had just watched her dreams literally collapse. "It's over," she said simply. "We can't do it."
The admission should have brought relief, but instead it brought something worse, a sense of complete defeat that went beyond the wedding itself. Stacy felt like she had failed at everything: saving money, standing up to her family, building the life she wanted, even maintaining her own health and sanity.
That evening, as they sat in Stacy's apartment eating takeout Chinese food neither of them wanted, the full scope of their situation became clear. They had spent 4 months working themselves to exhaustion, damaging their health and their relationship, pursuing a goal that was now impossible to achieve on their timeline. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, pushing lo mein around his plate without eating. "I don't know," Stacy admitted. "I honestly don't know." The conversation that followed was the most difficult of their relationship. Marcus, with the gentle persistence that made him a good accountant, walked Stacy through their options with painful clarity. They could continue working side jobs and save for a July wedding in New Zealand, but that would mean 5 more months of the schedule that was already destroying them. They could scale back to a simpler destination, but Stacy had become so emotionally invested in the New Zealand plan that alternatives felt like compromises. They could return to planning a local wedding, but that felt like admitting her family had won. "Or," said Marcus carefully, "we could just get married." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we could go to the courthouse next week and have the wedding that actually matters. The legal part, the commitment part, the part where we promise to love each other forever. We could have a party later when we have more money and less stress, or we could not have a party at all." The suggestion hung in the air between them. It was practical, affordable, and would allow them to start their married life without the crushing financial pressure they'd been living under. But it also felt like the ultimate defeat, as if her family's betrayal had reduced her dreams to the simplest, most basic option available. "That's not a real wedding," Stacy said, her voice hollow. "Why isn't it real? Because there won't be flowers? Because your family won't be there to take credit for something they tried to destroy?" Marcus's words were harsher than usual, revealing his own frustration with the situation they'd created. "Because it's not what I wanted. It's not what we planned for. It's not what we've been working toward." "What we've been working toward is making ourselves miserable," Marcus shot back. "We spent 4 months turning our engagement into a business venture. We're not planning a celebration anymore. We're managing a crisis." The argument that followed was their worst ever. Years of careful communication and mutual respect dissolved into accusations and resentment. Marcus accused Stacy of caring more about proving her family wrong than about their actual relationship. Stacy accused Marcus of giving up when things got difficult, of not understanding how important it was to her sense of self-worth. "This isn't about self-worth," Marcus said finally. "This is about revenge. You're not trying to build something beautiful. You're trying to prove that you don't need the people who hurt you. But Stacy, you're destroying yourself in the process." The truth of his words cut deeper than anything her family had done. In trying to prove she didn't need them, she had indeed lost sight of what actually mattered. The wedding had become a symbol of independence, but in pursuing it so obsessively, she had become dependent on validation from the very people she was trying to prove wrong. After Marcus left that night, the first time in their relationship he had walked out during an argument, Stacy sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her obsession. Wedding planning materials covered every surface. Freelance projects were stacked in corners. Her laptop was permanently plugged in, ready for the next client call or design revision. She tried to remember the last time she had read a book for pleasure, watched a movie without working on something else, or had a conversation that wasn't about money or logistics. She couldn't. The woman who had started this journey as a response to her family's betrayal had become someone she didn't recognize, someone whose life was consumed by reaction rather than creation, by proving rather than living. At 2 a.m., still awake and staring at her ceiling, Stacy realized that her family hadn't just stolen her money. In her response to their theft, she had allowed them to steal something much more valuable: her joy, her health, her relationship, and her sense of who she was. The breaking point had arrived, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a quiet recognition that she had lost herself completely in the pursuit of proving she couldn't be broken.
The irony was devastating. In trying to show that her family's actions couldn't destroy her dreams, she had done the destroying herself. As dawn broke over Portland, Stacy made a decision that would change everything once again. But this time, the change wouldn't be about running towards something or away from something. It would be about finding her way back to the person she used to be, before betrayal and revenge had consumed her life.
The phone call came at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning in late November. Stacy had been awake for hours, sitting by her window with a cup of coffee, watching Portland wake up beneath a blanket of early winter fog. She hadn't spoken to Marcus in 3 days since their argument, and the silence felt like a physical weight in her chest. "Stacy, honey, we need to talk." It was Linda, but her voice carried none of its usual brightness. Instead, she sounded tired and somehow smaller than Stacy remembered. "If this is about the cruise photos, Mom, I'm really not in the mood to hear about your amazing Mediterranean adventure." "It's not about the photos." Linda paused, and Stacy could hear her take a shaky breath. "The cruise it was a disaster, sweetheart. A complete disaster." Despite everything, Stacy felt a flicker of concern. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" "We're physically fine, but oh, honey, I've made such a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." Over the next hour, Linda told a story that was both shocking and somehow inevitable. The incredible deal Uncle Jerry had promised turned out to be a sophisticated travel scam. The company was real, the cruise ship existed, but the accommodations were nothing like what had been advertised. The family had been crammed into a windowless interior cabin meant for 2 people, not 4. The promised shore excursions either didn't exist or cost hundreds of dollars extra. The food was terrible, and Tyler had gotten food poisoning on the 3rd day. But the real disaster had been emotional. Linda had spent the entire trip watching her family suffer through what was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime, knowing that every miserable moment was paid for with her daughter's stolen dreams. "Tyler was so sick he couldn't eat for 4 days," Linda continued, tears evident in her voice. "Melissa cried every night because she missed her boyfriend and felt guilty about being there. And your father just sat on the deck every evening, looking out at the water and asking me what we'd done to our family." Stacy listened in stunned silence as her mother described 2 weeks of family tension, buyer's remorse, and growing guilt. "But the worst part," Linda said, "was when I finally admitted to your father how I'd paid for the trip. I told him about taking the money from your wedding account, and he just looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore." Robert had been furious, Linda explained, not just about the theft, but about the deception. He had assumed the money came from their savings or that Uncle Jerry was paying more than Linda had disclosed. When he learned the truth, he had barely spoken to Linda for the remainder of the cruise. "He said I'd turned him into a thief, Stacy. He said I'd made him complicit in stealing from his own daughter, and he was right." The phone call continued for another 30 minutes, with Linda offering apologies that felt both genuine and inadequate. She had already called the bank to inquire about transferring money back into Stacy's account, but most of the $18,000 was gone, spent on the fraudulent cruise, wasted on a vacation that brought misery instead of joy. "I can give you back about $4,000, Linda said. "It's not nearly enough, but it's all we have left. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I took from you, and I'm so sorry." After Linda hung up, Stacy sat with the phone in her lap, processing emotions she couldn't name. There was vindication. Her mother's apology validated the hurt and anger Stacy had been carrying. But there was also sadness, because the apology didn't undo the damage to their relationship or restore the time and energy Stacy had spent trying to rebuild what was taken. Most surprisingly, there was relief. For months, Stacy had been driven by the need to prove that she didn't need her family, that she could create something beautiful despite their betrayal.
But the mother's confession revealed that the betrayal had ultimately hurt them more than it had hurt her. The cruise they had stolen her money to fund had been a complete failure, while Stacy had discovered strengths and possibilities she never knew she possessed. That afternoon, Stacy did something she hadn't done in months. She took a walk without purpose. No errands to run, no clients to call, no deadlines to meet. She walked through Powell Butte Nature Preserve, breathing cold air and letting her mind process everything that had happened since July. She thought about the woman she had been 4 months ago. Careful, responsible, focused on meeting expectations and following conventional paths. That woman had been devastated by her family's betrayal because her sense of security was built on trusting others to protect her interests. But the woman she had become was different. She had learned to advocate for herself, to take risks, to build something from nothing through sheer determination. More importantly, she had discovered that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. The realization that emerged during her walk was profound. Her family's theft had been terrible, but her response to it had taught her more about herself than any conventional path could have had. She was stronger, more creative, and more independent than she had ever imagined.
When she got home, Marcus was sitting on her front steps, holding 2 cups of coffee from their favorite cafe. "I brought a peace offering," he said, standing up as she approached. "And an apology. I was wrong to walk out on you, and I was wrong to dismiss how important this was to you." They sat on her couch, and Stacy told him about Linda's call. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to anger to something like relief. "So what do we do now?" he asked finally. Stacy looked at him, this man who had supported her through months of chaos, who had worked himself to exhaustion for a dream that wasn't even originally his, who had been willing to challenge her when she was losing herself, but came back when she needed him most. "We get married," she said simply, "not because we have to, not because it's practical, but because that's what we actually want to do." "What kind of wedding?" Marcus asked carefully. Stacy smiled and realized it was the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. The kind that makes us happy. Maybe that's a courthouse ceremony with dinner at our favorite restaurant. Maybe it's a backyard celebration with close friends. Maybe it's still New Zealand, but next year when we can save for it without destroying our health. Over the following weeks, Stacy and Marcus planned a wedding that felt authentically theirs. They would have a small courthouse ceremony on December 21st, the winter solstice, symbolizing the beginning of longer days and new possibilities. Janet Morrison offered to host a reception at her house with homemade food and music from Marcus's carefully curated playlist. Rebecca, their travel agent, suggested they use the money they had saved for a weekend honeymoon at Crater Lake, returning to the place where Marcus had proposed. The guest list included 12 people, Marcus's parents and sister, 3 couples who were their closest friends, Janet Morrison, and surprisingly, Robert Henderson. After Linda's confession, Robert had reached out to Stacy directly, asking if he could attend her wedding and personally apologize for his role in the betrayal. Linda, Tyler, and Melissa were not invited. It wasn't a decision made in anger, but a recognition that forgiveness didn't require including toxic relationships in important moments. Stacy had learned the difference between maintaining family ties and protecting her own well-being. The wedding itself was perfect in its simplicity. Stacy wore a vintage dress she found at a consignment shop for $150. Marcus wore his best suit with a new tie Stacy had given him. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes, and every word felt meaningful because it was chosen deliberately rather than performed out of obligation. At the reception, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness, Stacy realized something profound. The wedding her family's betrayal had made impossible would have been beautiful, but it would also have been performed for an audience that included people who didn't truly support her.
This celebration, born from loss and struggle, was witnessed only by people who had earned the right to be there. 6 months later, Stacy and Marcus took their delayed honeymoon to New Zealand. They used money they had saved after their wedding without pressure or deadlines, simply because they wanted to experience the adventure together. The trip was everything they had dreamed it would be, made more precious by the journey it had taken to get there. Looking back, Stacy could see that her family's betrayal, while painful, had been a catalyst for growth she never would have achieved otherwise. She had learned to stand up for herself, to build something from nothing, to recognize her own strength, and to choose her family based on love and support rather than genetics and obligation. The money Linda eventually returned, $4,200, went into a savings account Stacy opened entirely in her own name. She called it the Dream Fund, and it represented not a specific goal, but a commitment to always believe in her ability to create the life she wanted, regardless of who supported or opposed her along the way. Years later, when people asked Stacy about her wedding day, she would tell them it was perfect, not because everything went according to plan, but because it taught her the difference between what she thought she wanted and what actually made her happy. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of her dreams had actually been the beginning of a much better story, one where she was the author, the heroine, and ultimately, the one who got to choose the ending.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.